On this episode of Ask Christian Counseling Associates, join us for a conversation with CCA counselors Don Ritchie and Andrew Schnur as we explore how faith and family form the foundation of emotional healing and spiritual growth. Hear Don's insights as a mother and experienced counselor, and Andrew's perspective as a new father and leader of tag groups at CCA. Welcome, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we have Don Ritchie here for the first time, and Andrew, welcome back. Good to have you on the podcast. And why don't we just start out? We're here talking about faith, family, and healing. Every once in a while, I like to just come in and talk about current events that are happening in psychology and Christianity. So I thought we would come together and really talk about what's trending in the news about that, or just what you've experienced as counselors in general about that. But Don, since we have you on for the first time, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Of course, you're interning here with us, and this is your second semester, is it, or first still?
I'm just finishing up my first semester.
Okay.
I'll start my practicum piece middle of May. And I've really enjoyed my experience here. I'm a only parent of 4 children. I'm a widow, and decided to move from education to counseling later in life, but really feel like this is kind of always where God's been leading me. I'm really enjoying being able to work for a Christian agency that, allows me to be authentically Christian. So,
yeah, well, that's great. So we have excellent internship experience here, and, people really decide to become a counselor at any part in their life. And so you were an educator and raised a family of 4 children. What were the ages of your children? Are they adults or?
My children are fairly young still. My daughter is 12, and then I have 3 boys that are 16, 17, and 18.
Okay, very good. And so they're near, some of them, but that's a large family. So were you? And you also worked as an educator before?
I did. I had about 15 years in education when I met my late husband. We looked at having children naturally, ended up going the adoption route, just for health reasons and because there were children out there who needed a good home and we could provide that. So we adopted 3 boys, and about a year after their adoption was finalized, their mother and father lost custody of their baby sister as well. So she was 2 months old when she came to live with us.
Okay. Wow. So that's interesting in itself, adoption and maybe some specific challenges that would bring about as a parent. Did you notice anything, that stood out to you as challenges over the years?
From the adoption piece, I think there are things that sometimes we as the adults involved in the situation make issues that don't have to be. In terms of the biological family, we had a very open relationship with them. Mm-hmm. My children are well versed in they were 3, 4, and 5, my boys, when they came to live with me. They knew they had people who loved them. They knew they had people who were mommy and daddy and grandma. And for our feeling on that was that if we took that away from them, while it would be easier for us, it would not be the best thing for our children. So as long as we sat with them and were very upfront in that, as long as it was a positive relationship for our children, that we wanted them to be in their life. But that as their parents, if it became a situation where it was no longer positive for them, that we would terminate that relationship.
Okay.
And so they've been able to have a very open relationship, particularly with their biological mom and their biological grandmother before she passed. So we had them at holidays and grandparents' breakfasts and baseball games, the whole 9 yards, just like any family.
So there's these natural scenarios, of course, that adopted children want to meet their birth parents no matter what. They wonder, who are my parents? Why was I given up for adoption?
Where did I come from?
Where did I come from?
Why do I enjoy this when my adoptive parents don't? Yeah.
And so there's a list of questions like that, and the adoptive parents have to decide how they connect that relationship if it's possible, and sometimes it's not. And you mentioned that your daughter was adopted at 9 months. Two. Okay, so almost immediately.
Mm-hmm. She came to live with us at 2 months. Her adoption was about a year after that, but.
Yeah, so even when there's no memory of any kind of relationship with the parents, it's deeply meaningful to find out who exactly are these people. And it can host a series of challenges and be dysfunctional.
Yeah.
What was it in your case? Did it work out?
There were times when it would have been easier to not be in relationship with the biological family. Uh-huh. But honestly, more times than not, it was a blessing. They had more people in their life who loved them. They had, my family is from Ohio, so we were not local. So they had family events that they could attend, family reunions, things like that. So it really, and it also let them, they can visually see, where they came from and ask the people who were responsible why they couldn't stay, and also see the blessings that were provided for them through adoption. So it's been definitely more positive than negative.
Okay. So that was one of the distinctives about your family is you adopted 4 children. Yeah. And you'd also mentioned that your husband had passed away at some point. Now, how that's been fairly recent.
Yeah, in 2020, right as COVID was coming to light, he was returning home from a business trip and didn't make it home. He stopped on the side of the road to rest and was killed. So we had, it was a challenge, especially he was away. He worked away a lot. So with him being taken from us when he was away, we kept waiting for him to come home. It took a long time for that realization that he's not going to come back through the door to hit us all. Yeah. So that was a challenge, one of the biggest, I think.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, it was just tragic, and I don't know what you're comfortable talking about today. So just whatever you want to share about it.
The biggest thing that I made a decision early on that the person who took him from us had taken all they were going to get. And I made but for the grace of God, I wouldn't be able to have done that, but I just made a decision that I had to take everything I had, which wasn't a whole lot at first because I was, dealing with the loss myself, but everything I had to be focused on my children and stepping one foot in front of the other and making sure they were fed and going to school and functioning for the first year. And then we, kind of got back into more of a regular routine. I wouldn't say normal because it's a permanent change in who we are as a family and how we deal with life, Did
they catch the person who did this? Or?
Unfortunately, no. Unless the person commits another crime, we'll never know. But that's between that person and God. It's my hope that that person has made their peace with God and has asked for forgiveness for that. But either way, God has it under control, and I can't entertain the brain space to worry about that, because if that was my focus, I wouldn't be able to focus on the day-to-day with my kids.
Well, you're talking about how you face that reality of losing your husband in such a tragic sense, and I mean any form would be, but in this specific sense, and just I could only imagine, the kind of things that go through your mind about this. But you're talking about dealing with that, but maybe if you could if I could ask you to summarize, like, with 4 kids, going through the period of COVID and losing your husband, how did you deal with all of that? That gets you to here.
Reality is not well for the first year. I mean, we functioned, for lack of a better word. I got them to school. I got them fed. I got them, the day-to-day things that had to be done so that they had clothes to wear to school done. But there was about a year there where we literally just functioned. And after that, we began to try to put the pieces back together. Part of that was moving. We moved to a new home because being in the home that we had been in with their dad was really hard. And so we basically started over in a lot of ways. We got a new home, and they moved to a new school district where nobody knew their story, because that was very hard for them. People constantly asking how they were doing and bringing it up. The kids all deal with it differently. I have one son who would just as soon not talk about his dad. He'll bring him up on occasion, and it's gotten better over the years. But initially, he wanted nothing to do with that conversation about the good, the bad, anything dealing with his dad. He still really struggles with the loss. And I think they all struggle with the loss. We all struggle with the loss. Some days are better than others. Yeah. And that's one of the things, in the counseling piece that I share with people who are dealing with grief, is that it's not a 5 steps and you're done thing. It's not a after a year you should be all better thing. I sort of describe it as a tornado, and that it's like this house stuck in a tornado. And at the very beginning, that tornado is really small, and that house hits you every time it comes around. But as the tornado goes and gets bigger and wider, it hits you less often. And that's, really the best you can hope for when you're dealing with grief.
That are getting pulled apart, it hits you less often.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it hits you sometimes, and it's unrealistic to think that these kinds of life-changing events have a beginning and an end. They become part of you. And that is just, you could talk about it in a positive or negative sense, but the most important part is that that's just a reality we need to understand.
Yeah.
And
it's hard because people who haven't lived through those levels of grief struggle to understand, and they say things that are meant to be helpful. He's in a better place. He's, God only takes the angels, and they say those things not out of meanness, but out of ignorance, because they don't understand how it feels, and they don't know how to help, and they want to do something to help. But another thing in grief that is so important that I would tell everybody, if you know somebody who's going through something like this, instead of asking, how can I help? Just do something for them. Mow their grass. Yeah. Drop off groceries. Send them a gift card for taking out to a restaurant, because they're not going to feel like cooking sometimes. But just do it, because in that time, those who are dealing with that grief are not in a mindset to know what they need done.
Yeah.
And you're trying to be helpful, but it just doesn't.
To have somebody do something for you, to express sympathy instead of asking you to provide a way, is infinitely more effective. And so how did the church do? Final question on this, and then we're going to move on to talk about Andrew's family.
Okay.
how did they do? Did they do okay at helping you in that sense? Was the church able to be a part of this?
My church family was amazing. They, and it was so hard because it was during COVID. So we had a very small gathering at the funeral.
Like churches were shut down. So
yeah,
no funerals allowed.
Right. And we did have a funeral, but it was limited to 20 or 25 people. And so we had to deal with that. He was former Navy, so the military salute had to be done outside. They couldn't come into the facility. Wow. But they still came and they did it for him, so they were there. My church family pulled together a picnic in my front yard and brought food, and afterwards, that's where we gathered. Since we couldn't gather inside anywhere, we had a small gathering of people outside in the front yard, which was good for the kids and gave them that opportunity to engage with people. But yeah, it was important for me that the church was there and supportive, and they did a great job. Having that church family made a big difference.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that you can say that. So again, I think I lied. One more question. After all, going through this in the past 4 years, you shift gears also to say, I'm going to become a counselor now, Christian counselor. What made you do that?
Try to make this as succinct as possible. I think I always was being led to counseling. In college, I had a friend, and we had lived very parallel lives through elementary, middle school, high school. Our parents would compare us to each other. And she went into psychology. And I felt like I can't follow her into that. So what was my second choice? I could work with kids, and I always loved kids, so I went into education. And loved my job in education. And so much of what I did in education is very functional for what I'm doing now, in terms of being able to plan and understanding how to make goals and objectives. And
it's a very good discipline.
Yeah.
To know how to teach people.
Right. And it comes in very handy.
Yeah.
But I, about 2 years ago, I was like, my kids are getting older. I can actually give myself some time. What do I want to do? Do I want to go back to work? Do I want to, take out a loan and go to school? And I decided that I was being led to work with people and to do counseling and make a difference. And when it came time to find a place to do that, I thought I would be led to doing something school-based because of my past.
Sure.
But that's not where God led me. And he led me here. And this has been such a blessing in terms of my own Christian growth and my ability to, really provide meaningful care, both mentally and spiritually, to my clients who are interested in that.
That's great that you can say that. And to tell the folks out there, I think plenty of Christians want to have the best impact that they can in the church and in their faith walk. You can become a Christian counselor as one of those ways of having an impact, and that God calls people to become faithful counselors. That word is all through the scriptures. Yep. Jesus is the wonderful counselor. And this is a calling that people answer, that God leads them into. And, so maybe some people out there, like you, Dawn, would consider that when they're considering, what are my next steps in serving God.
And absolutely, and if you feel like you're being drawn to stand in the gap with people when they're going through things. And that's what I tell my clients all the time. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to boss you around. I'm not here to give you a bunch of advice.
Counseling is not advice giving.
I'm here to walk with you through what you're going through, and to help you be the best you that you can be.
Very good. And, Dawn comes to us with plenty of life experience. And, we have people who come, they're just starting out too. And every point in between, we train up Christian counselors here at CCA. And so it's really great that you've joined the internship program and, all of what's to come, God willing,
Yes.
So, thanks for sharing some of your story.
Absolutely.
And so we're talking about, and we're talking about family today. So Andrew, your family experience, and we were just recently talking about this. The challenges that you have faced. Because really we're trying to speak to today that people are facing spring. And we all have a chance now that we're through the winter to look at new beginnings,
right?
What's your family background that you could relate to? Just that there are challenges.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things, Don, just about your story is so encouraging. Just the faithfulness. Through time, like I can learn from that as I consider some of my own challenges and in our family. So my wife and I, we've been married for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in June. And, we've had kind of an interesting road to becoming parents ourselves. And in June of 2019, we had our first miscarriage, and then we had 4 more miscarriages, and then we took some time off. We had 5 miscarriages in a span of about 18 months. And in the middle of that, it was also adjusting through COVID and trying to figure out how do we move forward, and we felt this strong desire, to be parents. And one of the things that we were just trying to figure out, and like, how do we do this? Even if it's not going to be biological children, we considered fostering. And so we applied to be foster parents here in the county, here in Westmoreland County, and that was just part of a step of obedience, that we took, in faith. And one of the amazing things is just, God has just a kind of a curious way of doing things sometimes, but not 3 weeks after our foster certification was approved, we found out that we were pregnant. And so kind of changing some of the plans that we had, with that. And we thought, well, instead of a long-term placement, we'll take a couple of, respite care or short-term placements. And as we try and figure out where we were going to land, with this pregnancy. And
they would bring you also like very young kids, like babies, I think. And they would be there for like a weekend or something.
Exactly.
And I remember that clearly.
That happened for us a couple of times. The first one that we took wasn't until maybe October. So we were probably halfway through our pregnancy at that point. My wife was just incredibly sick, to get started. And then we were just trying to figure out how do we adjust now to this kind of new routine, because it kind of took a lot out of us. But we took a placement in October, just a little 6-month-old boy, and it was just very interesting. His sleep schedule was very different than ours was. We thought that a normal baby would go to bed maybe around 8 o'clock. For him and what he was used to in the family and the home that he was coming from, that was just when he had a nap. And he would be up until 1 a.m. And finally at 1 a.m, after us trying literally everything we could think of to get him back to sleep and to calm him down, he would finally go to sleep. He wouldn't wake up though until about 10 a.m. And so just adjusting to the new schedule was always that was just a difficult adjustment. So we had him for a weekend and for about 5 days actually. And then he was able to go back to his long-term care. And then the other placement that we had was actually a 17-year-old. So we had both ends of the spectrum, but nothing in between. Wow. And so it was
extremely young or extremely old. And
it was very interesting.
And then your daughter is born.
Yep. So February of 23, our daughter's born. She just turned 2 a couple of months ago. And she has been the absolute greatest blessing in our lives. She has just so much joy, so much energy, and so much life, that's in her. And God, when we look at, just the journey that God has brought us through to that point, we're just in awe. And, and we're still kind of walking through that journey in a lot of ways as well, because we still, wanted to try and grow our family as well. And so we maintained our foster certification, still thought that we would do a respite care. And so we did, one last year, and that was very interesting. Another 6-month-old boy. And, but then we also recently found out that we were pregnant again, and now with, a growing family and, one kid on the way, I think we're going to set that aside for a season and just adjust to this rhythm and find out other ways that, that we can help too. But the journey that we've been on, just talking about challenges and difficulty, it's really caused us to really wrestle through just our faith in God. What do we believe about God? Whenever you lose a pregnancy, my heart always goes to, well, why? How is God glorified in this? And sometimes the answers were not clear, but one of the ways that we began to process through it, and something that I held on to was just there's a purpose that God can bring out of even some of the most challenging loss, to be able to help others and to be able to encourage others who are going through some of the same things, infertility and miscarriage and recurrent pregnancy loss and all that are very difficult topics to kind of bring out into the open generally, and a lot of couples will bear those burdens silently and in isolation. And that's been something that my wife and I both have been really passionate about, to try and find ways to connect with those couples and to provide encouragement and to, like you said, I like the way you put that, to walk with them through that, because I think we understand some of the things that they're going through and what that looks like.
So in the aftermath of those miscarriages, it sounds like your empathy for other people who are going through challenges in their family became much more sharper. That you realize, like,
absolutely,
there's these people. It's really difficult, to connect with that. But for you, having going through it personally, and now you have a vision for that.
Yeah.
So, I'd ask you the same question. When you were going through these challenges, in your family, was the church able to be a part of that? How'd that go?
Yeah, it was incredible to see the ways that our church family was able to surround us, and specifically the small groups that we've been a part of throughout the years. We've been in a family small group consistently since 2019, and it was kind of around the same time that we were starting to experience some of these losses. And I just remember the first loss that we had, our small group put together this little memory box for us, just as a way to let us know that they were caring for us, and they were praying for us. They showed up with meals. They showed up just with their presence in really powerful ways, and it helped. It helped us tremendously. And now recently, like, I love how you put that. What do we do for people who are struggling? Just show up and do something for them. Take them a meal. Show up with groceries, and even through some of these losses, and also, like, after our daughter was born, we had meals for a month, just from people within the church who were just showing up on our door and saying, hey, here's food for 6. I know that there's only 2 of you plus this little tiny baby, but we're going to take care of you.
We belong to the same church campus, different campuses, but same kind of system. They have a meal ministry, and I'm sure there's other things, but I've experienced that part of it, and it's just surprising how, like, what a blessing, and like how that is helpful. Like when you show, like, somebody brings a meal to your door, when you're going through something.
And when it first happens, you are like, "Oh, I need freezer space," because you get so overwhelmed by meals, and it's just the love that comes with those that is so meaningful.
It's quite an expression. Yeah. So it sounds like that went well, and so that's great to hear. Although, we have these two things. It's a collection of interventions that we have, and it's extraordinary parenting, extraordinary marriage, and the core part of that intervention is to have other people there with you, and that is the most difficult thing for people. They're like, a lot of people want to come here to individual counseling, but when you mention that you're going to involve other people in that intervention, they're like, what? Why? Like, why would I do that? I don't want other people knowing about my things, or I don't want to have to sort of run the risk of them giving me some kind of like bad vibe, bad advice, bad reaction. Judging me, all that kind of stuff. What we find is that is the component, though, that is most profound. Like when somebody makes a gesture to you spontaneously, how that gets in your mind, and how that, starts a healing process.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And being with others who have similar experiences, even if they're not going through the same issue in their marriage or with their children, they're still parents, or they're still in a couple relationship, and there are going to be things that you connect on, and having someone who helps you feel not alone.
Yeah.
As you go through those things.
Yeah. So one of the trends that are still, happening, if we're going to talk about trends today, is that families are still, especially with kids, dealing with the aftermath of a long period of isolation that was produced during COVID. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that's surprising to anybody that we still have our eyes on that trending topic, that, here we are in 2025. Kids are still shocked by missing things like graduations, funerals, just the parties or gatherings, whatever they were, being at church, being on a team, being able to be in school and see each other's faces. All those kind of things really were very dysfunctional as far as people's emotions and what was created out of that. So the opposite of isolation is connection. And, in both of these challenges, we're asking the question, has it been easy for people to connect with the church during these kind of things? Because these are two very good examples of being able to do that. But we've all heard that, people have not had a good time doing that. Just in your experience, have you seen that as counselors?
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about that, my role here at CCA is I'm one of our drug and alcohol counselors, and I think I mentioned this in the first podcast that I was on, but addiction breeds in isolation but dies in connection. And I think a lot of the things that we're dealing with that will bring people into counseling are going to be just really dysfunctional symptoms, whether it's depression or anxiety, addiction, broken relationships. They often will find themselves disconnected from their support system, and that's, I think, one of the things that I've noticed is that people who are connected to a support system, whether it would be within their family or within the church, are going to be generally more successful in navigating that journey of mental health or addiction recovery than people who aren't. And I think if people are out there and they're listening and they're trying to figure out, well, what does this mean for me? I don't have people like that. Right now, like wherever you're at today is the best opportunity for you to be able to start like preparing yourself for those relationships. Like I could think about if I was in isolation, as I was going through some of these challenges, like I wasn't working for a church, or I wasn't connected with my faith or with a small group, that these challenges for our family would have really derailed us. And so if there's ever a time, where you're able to build some of those relationships, I would say do it. Yeah, because you don't know when something's going to happen, when somebody's not going to come home from a business trip, or when you don't get the news that you were hoping for, or the news that you were dreading, or something else. To be able to have those people who can respond to you within just a phone call or a text message, and show up at your door with a meal.
Yeah,
those relationships get cultivated today.
Those things are huge, and going through some kind of challenge, you see all the potentialities of getting derailed just when you're dealing with two people, but then you add 10 people into it. All kinds of different things can happen now. Instead of saying, for instance, a lot of people get compulsive around grief. They just continue to ruminate on the same thing over and over again until it just drives you crazy. You can't really do that when other people are around, if it's going well. Again, though, I think of all the things that people that we watch will say, "Man, I'm having a trouble. I don't know how to do that." Dawn, have you seen any examples of people just struggling to make connections?
I think that my experience is limited, of course, but in my experiences so far in the counseling realm, I think that most of my individual clients are struggling to make connections, whether it's with the people they live with, or whether it's with society, or whether it's having a friend group, that we've become very media focused as a people. We've become very, let me look through my Facebook and give me, heart everybody, and post the pictures when we're smiling, but that doesn't connect you. And we've kind of lost that ability to talk to people and find that common ground. And I think that that's one of the things that being a part of a church allows you to do, is to find common ground with the people around you. That even if you're struggling with your faith, there are other people within the church who are struggling with their faith. And that's my cautionary tale for those who are going through things, or those who have been disappointed by the church, is just to remember that the people inside the church are just people inside a church. They're not holier than thou. They're not better than you. They're not gonna be perfect. They're going to do things that are stupid. They're going to make stupid comments. They're going to hurt your feelings on occasion. The only difference is that they go and ask for forgiveness for those things.
Yeah, so that's interesting, though. The people would be more on social media now, and maybe in a feeling sense, I get more out of that. It's more interesting to me. Why would I put time in my schedule to do this? That's too complicated. I don't have time. And that probably, what I hear from most people is just it doesn't fit in my schedule, and I don't know when I could get that done with all the things that I have to do as far as work. For children and adolescents, it would be homework, schedules. Can somebody get me a drive there? My parents aren't going, so I can't go. Would probably be like my first assumption. The things that I see people struggle with. But there's a lot of people who are disconnected like that, who don't have the kind of things that you're describing. And so I wonder if, so that was one of the trends that, we know here, that getting people in a group intervention is dramatic in what it does for people who are depressed, anxious, grieving, struggling with substance use disorders. It's one of the things we really try to get people to. and people don't really realize it. Yeah, but in your descriptions, I can hear, how that was really effective, in facing, whatever, we were. So there's these, it's part of our, our trending topics is that the Gen Z, there's a spiritual reawakening amid these mental health challenges, that the kids would be, open to dealing with this on a deeper level if they had somebody to lead them there. So there's this article that I'll put up on the screen here. This is from the Gospel Coalition. 5 reasons Gen Z is primed for spiritual renewal. And I'm just going to read these off, see what you think. Why is Gen Z primed for spiritual renewal? First, do we believe that? Do we believe that kids would care to make a connection with the church if they had the opportunity to do that? And one is, we just talked about, isolation during the pandemic created a hunger for belonging. 45% of Gen Z reported severe loneliness. People are lonely. Mm-hmm. 2, and you feel free to chime in here, but 2, disillusionment with ineffective, abusive, hypocritical leaders is creating a hunger for sincere, humble, transparent leadership.
Christian Counseling Associates is ready to serve you, providing a wide range of counseling services. Christian counseling is accessible to everyone. We serve both Christians who want their faith integrated into the counseling process, or those holding any beliefs or attitudes toward spirituality. With many years of counseling experience, our counselors are professional, licensed, highly trained, and rooted in their commitment to their church and communities. CCA is able to provide a full range of clinical counseling services. For more information, visit our website at www.ccawpa.com.
Well, and I think part of that comes from the natural longing that our souls have for connection. And we were created to be in relationship with others. And so there is that, I think, this just natural tendency to want and have that desire for someone to truly see you and understand you. And many of them are able to find that through the church and through God.
Something that comes to my mind when I think about that reason number 2 is that young people don't know who to trust. And I think that's kind of in line with the rise of social media, where people present the best version of themselves. They put up this mask, this false self, this image that looks perfect. And where all information is presented as fact.
Yeah.
My opinion is a fact, and I'm going to put it out there as though it's fact. And having to really learn, I think they're having to learn that you can't trust everything. So what can you trust?
I know, and there have been many high-profile leaders, within society and even within the church as well, where they've experienced a moral failure, or even just in the regular media, where they see situations are presented that don't always meet the eye test, with what we can see. And so sometimes they feel like they're in this, at least what I've seen, that they're in this changing environment, that they don't know what the rules are, and they don't know what's happening to them. And that was one of the analogies that I used for young people during the pandemic, was that no matter what side of the aisle you were on, whether you were masked or not masked, or vaccine or no vaccine, the generation that suffered was the under 18, our young people, and Gen Z. And Gen Z generally is the children who were born between 97 and 2010. And so with that, kind of in mind, they were really struggling. And so like you talked about with the loss, of all of these in-person gatherings, graduations, proms, and sporting events and whatever else. But they didn't really get a choice in the matter.
Right.
And they didn't know who to trust either. And so they're looking for people who are going to, I fully agree with that, sincere, humble, and transparent. That hits me.
Okay. Number 3, pervasive anxiety is creating a hunger for deep peace. That among all these things that we've just seen in the past 5 years, there is isolation, disillusionment, and a general sense of fear that is driving people for something deeper. 4, digital self-projection and self-perfection are creating a longing for real-life, non-judgmental sincerity. So there's the social media component, that everything is perfect in pictures and, in this fantasy life. One of the things we talk about around here a lot is that everything is online now. And so we focus on online counseling, which we provide, and we do that with a goal of excellence, for everyone who will want to engage us on that. Before COVID, though, that was below 10% of the people would agree to do that with us. We never saw it as something that was going to be a focus for us as an organization. And then during COVID, you moved to almost 80% were online. And then afterwards, when when the restrictions left, it went down to about 45 to 50% of people stayed online. If you would have asked me before the shutdown and COVID, I would have said that that's ridiculous. It couldn't happen. People would never be able to withstand that. With just everything that happens in a real contact, all the dynamics that come out that you lose online. Mm-hmm. I just would not feel that people would accept that.
I think that's part of this generation that we're talking about, because social media and because the internet has become such a significant portion of their life. That's where they're comfortable. Yeah. It's easier to speak to someone over my computer than it is to sit face to face with them in a room.
Well, and I could be considered very old school in my view, so that's one of the things I would defer to Andrew, and maybe some people that you're in connection with. Would you say that people wouldn't think about that? They wouldn't be conflicted about being online now?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of it is that it has provided access to counseling to people who maybe thought that they weren't able to come in person. And so, as an example, I have some clients that they can only meet at 8:00 because that's after their kid goes to bed. Yeah. And otherwise, trying to meet them in person, just as an example, they would have to get a babysitter. They would have to arrange for all of these other accommodations, to make that happen. And so, is there a place for online counseling? Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. But I am also fairly old school. Everyone always told me when I was growing up that you're like an old soul. You're like a 40-year-old trapped in a 14-year-old body.
So we can bring you this way.
And so, but that was just kind of like how I connected. I valued the in-person relationship, and I valued being able to be with people face to face. And there's so much more, just even from my perspective as a counselor, that when we're behind a screen doing an online counseling session, that we'll just miss in the environment, just in the small little bits of nonverbal communication, that really present like a greater, clearer picture of what's going on, and and then we can address, I think, probably more effectively, more holistically.
And I absolutely agree with that. I mean, my preference is in-person counseling too. I think that they're, from the way that they come into the room to the way that they sit on the sofa, you can see a lot of, how people are feeling and how they're doing, that you don't pick up on, online. but I can understand why some people are more comfortable with that because it's less vulnerable.
It is, and it's this digital self-projection. We have a rule here at CCA that you're not allowed to use a false background in a meeting, and you can't mute yourself, regardless of what the background noise is. And our software filters out background noise, so you really can't hear it. But that, in a sense, is the guarantee that we make the public. You understand where our counselors are sitting. And I've been in plenty of meetings just in business land where I don't know where that person is. I don't know what they're doing. There's just this projection of them that I'm supposed to accept. And it just is not real. I have this theory that this is unsustainable. It can't last. And I know that makes me sound like I want to go back to the 19 whatever. I just, in my mind sometimes I fantasize about a world where you can't see people anymore. You can just meet with them online and what that would be like. And I think it's depicted in art, in movies sometimes where you can fantasize about that. There's a suggestion though, and I think the bad side of business is, for us, it does help us fit in more people into the schedule, make it more convenient for them to get here, all those kind of things. And I see other organizations that compete with us, secular organizations especially, that's all they're doing. And they've really found a way to capitalize on that. And so they're just encouraging it. Because it makes money. Is it good for us? Well, in this sense, again, taking a long time on number 4, that this digital self-projection and self-perfection, it can be used for good purposes, but it has plenty of pitfalls that people have found themselves in that they want to sort of get out of and into something more real. So moving on, don't get me on the soapbox on that. I talk forever on that.
He could.
Again, I get a little old school on that. But number 5, the loss of places of belonging is creating a hunger for healthy institutions where Gen Z can find mentors. All of this to me, to go back over this, it just, what are people dealing with now? As we would want families, and again, thank you for volunteering some of the challenges that you've had and that you can really articulate as counselors. I think that one of the things I'd want our listeners to really ask a question about right now is, what is going on in my family now? What challenges are we facing after we've gotten through all the busyness of the summer or the winter, and we're getting into spring and summer? Things are going to slow down a little bit. What are the challenges that we face? And they're not going to be, recognizable as some of the things that we've talked about that are severe challenges. The things that I think are most dangerous are these things that sort of creep up on you, that are always below the surface, that you never really take time to look at. And that's what's being described here, that's driving people back towards a spiritual awakening. And that again, we question that. Could that be happening? Because at the same time, I think, on the surface, it doesn't look like there's an interest in this, but you see things like isolation, disillusionment, anxiety, this digital world that people have gotten stuck in. Even though it can be good and efficient, there's plenty of ways that these innovations now have gotten people into places where they're wanting something more real. So this genuineness piece, these are all themes that I would encourage families, and this is we're focused on spring because kids will be coming back from college. People will be let out of school for the summer, and some parents will have time to notice things that they didn't. And that we should be asking these questions now. Is this, do these things play a part in my family? Yeah. But I would say, as somebody who just, we deal with all the people who are coming here, that we really appreciate. that these are real themes. I think this the Gen Z among mental health challenges are looking for something deeper to help them face, what they are. So that's a trending topic. There's another trending topic that we saw in the news over the last 12 months: pastoral mental health concerns. And this was, is this the right article? No, this is not the one I'm looking for. The mental health crisis ministers struggle to talk about. I don't know what your thoughts are about this. This is Christianity Today. And this talks about a Presbyterian pastor drowning in anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. And I think in the past couple of years, especially around the trends like isolation and challenges, that we've heard of stories of pastors committing suicide. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that to me, automatically, I just think of that. This is real. Again, we're asking the question, do we agree that there's a mental health crisis with ministers? Is this trend true?
I think there's just a mental health crisis with humans, and ministers are just that. They are humans who have a divine calling. And to think that, to put them on a pedestal of being, perfect, is to put them in God's place. Mm-hmm. Because they're not perfect. They're human just like you. And they struggle, I think, with allowing themselves to be human, because so many people do place them on a pedestal. So many people expect them to be better, and they strive for that every day. But that's what Christians do, is that we strive to be a better version of ourselves every day, to grow closer to being the image of Jesus and God, and
so Don, you're saying that pastors are people too. People would not expect that. They put them on a pedestal. Maybe that's part of what makes it really tough for them. But amid challenges, pastors and leaders, this is realistic.
Yeah, I think that, a pastor needs his tribe as much as anyone else, that group that you can go to, whether it is a small group, mm-hmm. or whether it is, you're blessed to have a strong family unit, which not everybody has, and wherever you're able to make those connections, a pastor needs that too. And they spend a significant part of their career being isolated or serving others and not being served themselves.
How about you, Andrew? You were in pastoral ministry, and so you knew a lot of pastors. We know a lot of pastors here because we consult with churches all over the place. Any reflection on this?
Yeah, and from my experience, I was a youth pastor for about 9 years, and so one of the things that I remember feeling, especially when my family was going through this struggle with pregnancy loss, was that it was not okay for me to be not okay, and just thinking about the burden of pastoral ministry and what everyone that is coming to our church is dealing with, and the students that we're dealing with, all of these incredibly challenging things just in their day-to-day life, that sometimes I had this image built up in my mind that I wasn't able to acknowledge my own struggles with mental health, or with isolation, or with some of these challenges. And then I also had, thoughts to myself too. Well, if I share, some of these things with other people that, I go to church with, or even just, that I'm connected to, that they would view me less, that their opinion of me would be harmed in some way, and that would affect my credibility as a leader. And so, there were times where, it was very lonely for me.
Yeah,
And,
this sounds like Nicholas Davis in this article. It says, he says it was a very busy season, kind of taking on too much and not realizing that I was in the midst of too much. And then in 2019, life at the Presbyterian Church in America was very busy, and it happened again. I bit off way too much, kind of hit a wall. He said, I never had a panic attack before, so I thought it was a heart attack. And, as this article goes on, it describes, he says, pastoring can feel like you are responsible for everything and in control of nothing. That this person is slowly getting overwhelmed and isolated, and is not sharing this with anybody. But Barna's research indicates that pastors' mental health has gotten worse in recent years. The COVID-19 pandemic was one obvious cause of stress and isolation. People in ministry also talk about the struggle of seeing political polarization come into their churches. Growing awareness of abuse also leads to increased suspicion of people in leadership, which can make the job of being a leader that much more difficult. So there's all these just complexities of being this person. I put you in a kind of you're just as human as everybody else, but maybe from what this article is talking about, you're in an unusual role. Mm-hmm. And one that can be isolating because there's not that many people who can relate to that. But I like your viewpoint. It's the viewpoint that I take on. Pastors are people too, and they need a place to be people. And that's what we provide here, and you need other spaces like that.
Absolutely.
Like a family where these things can be processed and connected over. But that was one of the challenges. Again, just going through these things that are in the press, and then faith communities embracing mental health initiatives. This is what do I do here? Just allow.
And if I could for a moment, Rich, before we move off of this topic, I want to just share an encouragement to any of our listeners out there who are dealing with this, especially if you're a pastor, that you would genuinely find people that you can reach out to. And if you're a churchgoer and sometimes you're maybe concerned about the direction that your church is going, or even just have doubts, that you would genuinely make a commitment to taking care of your pastor. We talked about some of these things earlier, just how important it was to have community. And I was thinking, reflecting, even just as we're talking here, one of the ways that we can step into that, just as individuals, would be to notice where we can help. If there's someone that you notice that is struggling, we're saying, hey, it's young people, and we need to show up for young people who are struggling with loneliness. We need to find ways to help. We're saying it's pastors that they're struggling with loneliness and isolation and a lot of fear of, if I share my struggle, are people going to leave my church, take their tithe and go somewhere else, and how that must feel or must come across to them. But people in their churches, if they were to commit to serving faithfully, loving, and just providing some of that space for their pastor, would be a tremendous aid to your pastor, and an investment, and not just in your church, but the long-term spiritual health of your community. And so just a little commercial for that, but please, take care of your pastors.
Yeah, we would love to see that happen. And we provide consultation to churches. A lot of times the churches are resistant to that, and at the same time, this has been one of the trends that, this article talks about a psychiatrist holding a panel at a church, and in Philadelphia, and that this is maybe in a generation before this would have been unheard of, but churches are seeking to innovate in the way that they deal with these types of problems, and so we would like to have churches find a way to do that. We have a system in a way that could occur. Still, though, churches are sort of sometimes not knowing how to handle these things and meet these challenges. When we go through family challenges, maybe there is no definable steps that you take to express sympathy or regard to somebody's life challenge. So, we're always glad to do that. But I've seen both. The church that I belong to, I think life is good there. There's plenty of like really strong things happening and responses, but still in every church, there are things that we ignore, we don't know what to do with.
Yep.
And I think it's so important that people, do see that, and especially pastors. I mean, I think that, coming alongside the pastors again and just being able to tell them that it's not only okay for them to have emotions and to feel them, but also that if someone comes to you with something that you're uncomfortable with, that there are people who will be there to support them, and I think it's so important for the pastors to know that there are organizations like ours, that are there with Christian backup, for lack of a, more sophisticated way to say it, but that it's okay for them not to know how to handle every situation, for them to feel like, to tell their parishioners, what, this one's above my pay grade, I'm going to give you a number.
Yeah. And we would be glad to take on any of those. So coming back to just, faith and family, here in springtime coming up, parents who are going to assess their families, what is going on now. I think what you're going to come up with is plenty of these types of themes. And, I hear, I'm in groups and I hear everybody saying, I'm anxious, not everybody, but like a significant amount of people. I feel depressed. I'm taking medication. I have ADHD. And, there's a lot of expressions in that. So, I think of, families and churches need to figure out how to raise the next generation in a hurting world.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, we're counselors. We know how to do that. We would like to, but what could we say? We think about personal challenges, how we did that. Well, we did that with God at the center, and we did that not in isolation, but with other people. And I'd like to add that, although you're not mentioning this, but what I see here today, like as we talk about this topic, you did that with a sense of the complexity, and so you were sensitive to all the different things like that were going through your mind, so you could talk about them here, where other people just are not prepared for that. So I think about some practical steps that we help people with. It's almost like a mental health first aid. If you will say, like, I'm not going to rattle off all of these, but the core steps to that is that when you meet with somebody who is hurting and challenged, and that's what we'd want parents to check in on this spring. If you're going to, in your family, engage these things, you have to have an empathy where people are hurting and be willing to get into the complexity. So you have to be willing to listen to the point where you'll feel some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you'll be able to imagine it in your mind. And it'll be in a sense that you're listening so closely that the person can tell. If you've accomplished that, you've accomplished an empathic connection. And then, like you're saying, we as counselors know, no advice, that can come. Especially in the later step where we're maybe providing help. But this listening and connecting over that is extremely helpful, as the person knows now that somebody is with them. And then, probably the biggest thing that I would want to watch out for as people come back from college, or as we get into what has happened this year, the school year, is that sometimes you're going to hear about somebody in crisis. Somebody is so overwhelmed that they do think about doing themselves in, or the crisis is more urgent. You want to identify that. You want to be always listening closely enough that if that is there, you will know it. You know, and so if you see somebody upset, don't walk the other way, walk towards them. You know, and
it's hard to put yourself out there. You know, even as a counselor, as a Christian, you know, there was a lady in the gym who was crying, and I found myself being, you know, God saying, go pray for her, go pray for her. And even I was like, me? Really? You want, you know, do you really? But, you know, I listened and I went and I prayed with her, and I don't know her name and I didn't know all of all of her situation, but I prayed with her. I asked her, I said, would it be okay if I prayed with you? And she was like, absolutely. Yeah. And just putting myself out in that way, you know, it wasn't easy even for me as a counselor or as an experienced, you know, Christian who prays with people a lot. You know, it's still putting yourself out there, but it makes such a difference in someone else's life. You never know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You never
it's
know.
Deeply personal. And, you know, that's great that we can do that. And look, everything's not perfect. We know that as counselors. It's sometimes, you know, the meeting is not the greatest or it didn't go well. You have to keep on trying, you know, to re-engage. And, yeah, so that's the basic. And then there's the last part of, you know, when you come upon something, you take a sympathetic action, like people did in your story and in yours. And in this case, especially in the worst, like it's a form of help, like you know. So we would like to be there for the help part, definitely.
Absolutely.
You know, so you can call us, and we're always going to be there. And you know, so sometimes, you know, people are going to come to this check-in at spring and say it's time to get other people involved, and we're going to do that with sensitivity. But the other thing I would say, if you listen to this conversation, and I'm just listening the whole time, you know, that the church was involved, other people were involved. That's your group. You know, you're a group person. I'm a group person here, so we have tag groups. And those are transparency and accountability growth groups.
Yep.
TAG.
Tag.
Just remember that, folks out there. You want to do the ultimate. You know, pastors who are feeling isolated, kids, parents. We have all different forms of this. Our extraordinary marriage, extraordinary parenting. Those are all group level interventions that are training people to open up their problems to a genuine and real, you know, human contact. And we've always known in psychology and in the church that these are powerful things, but I would say in the church we know that this is God's design, that he works through people to perform healing. So sometimes a family needs to connect with that. But this will, you know, now that things are less busy, this is a perfect time to rediscover the church routine, you know, to get back to church on Sunday, to find the student ministry on Sunday night or Wednesday night, to find out where that is in the schedule, make room for it, to place these people who will eventually become much like counselors to you, you know, and allow that to wrap around where things are now. You know, if you listen to the stories of Dawn and Andrew, and I have plenty of stories myself, you hear that component in there that I want you to imagine that it was missing, what this would have been like. And you know, my thought on that is, my belief, that Andrew and Dawn wouldn't be here. You know, they'd be stuck somewhere else. And that is a profound thing. We can't say that things are perfect in our lives, but we're facing it. Whatever that might be, and the ability to do that, that's life.
And I'm not facing it alone.
And we're not facing it alone.
Yeah.
You know, so that is the key. You know, that is the last part of that, you know, how to help people, you know, heal in a hurting world. You know, if you could put that together, you have it. I'm not going to say it's immediate. You know, in fact, it's a journey. Like you said, it doesn't have a beginning and an end. It becomes part of your life. That was wise People, I think, really need to realize that anybody in mental health who comes along and tries to sell you something different, don't believe it.
No. Everything we experience becomes part of our story of who we are. We decide whether that story is something we grow from or something we get stalled in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we have like special little tools here. One of the things, so we did ADHD tests.
There we go.
And I just, cause we have people, will say like, I'm having trouble in school. I had trouble all year long. You saw the grades drop. What are we going to do? One of the things is, everything looms large in the mind, but through psychological assessment, which is key, we measure how bad it is. And we have ways of, as scientifically possible as we can, we can test for that. And, so we contract with a company called Moxo, and they have developed, by testing 100,000 times to measure precisely, what is going on with your executive functioning. The part of the brain that is involved with ADHD deficits. And so we know that there's plenty of places that you can go that just sort of eye it up, where they listen to what you're feeling, but let's, in a standardized way, let's measure that and go from there. So what'd you think of the test?
I was interested. It was interesting.
It's a little bit odd. Like describe it. Like what?
Well, it starts out, and it's just, pick the right card, and then it keeps giving you more and more distractions from the card, and trying to maintain eye contact and make sure you're getting flipping the right card was, it got more challenging.
It's a performance test. So a lot of ADHD tests that are, I'd say all of them are just asking you to self-report. This one tracks your actual performance and measures it. So it's putting you in different kinds of environments where you could be distracted, both visually and auditorily.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's it's asking you to do stuff. What were your thoughts on the test?
It was very interesting to kind of work through, and I'm a sort of a perfectionist. And so I noticed whenever I missed, the card, because you have to press the space bar when the right card shows up, and I would be, so frustrated with myself. I want to be perfect, and it just wasn't going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see how bad I did when we talk about our performance test.
Yeah, well, let's take a look.
Those distractions are meant to bring up triggers for you potentially.
So this is Moxo, and this is we'll go through an abbreviated thing here, and I'll describe it to the folks. But we provide help for ADHD, and there's a lot of kids out there who have self-diagnosed themselves, or there's a teacher out there, or there's just a trend line in the academic performance. You said, oh my gosh, I'm ADHD. We have a way of determining that in a scientific way. So it's you compared to everybody else, on performance. And then as it reaches a certain level, we can reliably say that this meets the criteria, for, a deficit. So, here is Andrew's test.
This is the first time I'm seeing this too. So this is really fun.
Yes. This is a norm reference scale, which means it has like a pool of, a statistical sample that this is compared to. And it has, 4 areas: attentiveness, timeliness, impulsiveness, and hyperreactivity. So those are the 4 scales. And you can see here that the performance is different. Now in this, in attentiveness, standard. And in timeliness and impulsiveness, it was good. It was above average. And then for whatever reason, in the reactivity of things, you were a little low on that. Low norm range, which means it's still normal. We would
Thank
like
you.
to see it up in the green.
I'll work on that.
And I told them to do their best. So, first of all, we would test and retest at certain times after, because this would lead us to say, okay, let's take a look at this area in your life. And let's sort of see what's happening there. Is this significant for you? Now, of course, people are coming and saying, I have ADHD, and Andrew's not saying that. They would say, I'm concerned. Well, first, let's break this down into manageable components. And let's take a look at areas of your life and where this is causing more trouble or not. So, again, we have a way of doing that. But it also shows performance levels. So there was this place where this was going well, but in the audio section, this here became very problematic. So sometimes, and I'm not going to say like we would engage Andrew in counseling, and we would track where this is happening, and we try to discriminate where's it better, where's it worse. Well, here we would say, if you're in an area where there's a lot of noise, maybe we come up with a routine where we put you in a quiet area, just in the most important times. We're trying to get something, and we would nullify that. And you see, everything else is pretty much standard. It also could have meant that you had a bad round there.
It looks like I had a bad round there.
So we would also question.
We course corrected by the end. We got it back on track.
This amounts to, sometimes did you have a bad experience? Did you have something that you let define you, that brought you to this office? Maybe ADHD is not really the correct title. Let's look at this more deeply. In a very empathetic way, let's take time to listen to what's really going on and have a caring for that. And maybe we discover something deeper. And a lot of times, because a label like this could be life-changing, and people, it becomes their identity. Let's take some time to really, get some people involved.
And often labels will become limits too. Well, I can't do that. I have ADHD. And it will keep them from being able to excel in these certain areas or develop new skills or new relationships. And so we don't want to see labels, getting to that place where they limit us and limit our potential that God has given to us.
Yeah. We've had a lot of people just through the assessment process with ADHD really transform their thinking about how they're going to face what this problem really is in their life. And we'll walk alongside people, and whatever this quick label has brought on, and a lot of times that happens in isolation where it's taken on a life. And now, again, you put it into that mental health first aid. And if you're, getting to the springtime, and you're facing something like this, we'd like you to consider doing something, involving a counselor, involving a group, and it could transform the way that you deal with it in a good way. So that's your test, Andrew. And again, we won't geek out on this now. There's so much data that helps you sort of pull this apart, and a profile that we build that gives you a whole bunch of metrics, and
Nice.
But also an overview that helps you sort of see what happened. It's a really neat system. And this is a standard package for anybody who comes saying, I'm struggling with ADHD. You're going to go through a norm-referenced assessment process. So, thanks for taking part of that.
Very cool.
And, after the meeting today, I'll let you see your test, and you can take a look at it, and you can have it. So thanks for taking part of that. All these kinds of things here. But so I think the question that we would challenge the listeners with as we end is, what's one step that you can take this month to build your healing community, in your family, in your church, and in whatever group surrounds you. And I appreciate you sharing, some of the challenges in your life, as in your family. And I'd like to suggest out there, every one of us, has a challenge that we face that maybe we could, in a more personal way, start to get in touch with as we face the summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thanks for being with us. I'd like you to, maybe consider coming back and talking about, some of this more, letting the folks get to know you more sometime.
Anytime.
It was great to have you today.
Thank you.
Maybe, Dawn, would you pray for us and pray for, a family out there that maybe just resonated with what we were talking about, that's facing a challenge?
Absolutely.
Let us pray.
Father God, I just take this session to you, Lord. I just take this opportunity, this podcast to you, for you to use in the ways that you see fit, Father God. Reach out and touch those that may be seeking their own community, who may need to reach out to help find a way to deal with something that they're struggling with, Lord. I just pray that you would be with these families as they come into this new season, as they begin to prepare for the free time that summer is going to bring. Lord, that you would just be with them, that you would touch them, reach them, and lead them in the path that you would have them to go, Lord. And I pray that you would just be with us as we go about our jobs of helping people in their situations, that we would just lean on you and your guidance in each step we take. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Dawn, Andrew, thanks for being with us. And folks, thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next time.